Picture yourself on draft day. You're sitting there, back half of the first round, and you have a tough decision to make. Which running back do you want? And in the background, all you hear is the clock doing this. Tick, 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 tick. And all you see is Chubb and Zeke, Chubb and Zeke. Which one do I do? Chubb and Zeke. Tick. Only 3 seconds left, and then you panic, and you freeze, and you select Josh Jacobs instead. I mean, it happens every single year to somebody in a fantasy football league, right? That clock ticking down causes anxiety for some people, and if you don't know those tough draft day decisions ahead of time, you could find yourself in this situation. Well, it's time we address those tough situations right now. What is going on, Headliner Nation? Jake, Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully everybody's doing well out there today, where we talked about it in the intro, right? There are some tough draft day decisions that you're going to face here in 2021 fantasy football. Now, we're going to be doing these shows all off season long, myself and Kyle. Similar positions, similar ADP. Which ones would we choose if we were on the clock? Now, we're going to start it off today with our very first pairing, and we talked about it early. It's Nick Chubb and Ezekiel Elliott. You're sitting there, back half of the first, and both of these guys are available. Which ones would I take? Which ones would you take? That's what we're going to be talking about here today. I have them both broken down in some pretty good detail to try to figure out what the best possible case is for us here this year. So that way, when the clock is ticking, you ain't got to even let it get to 3 seconds left. You know which way you're going. And like I said, this is just the first of many videos that we're going to do on this topic here throughout the offseason. So make sure you hit that subscribe button and stay tuned so you are 100% ready for your fantasy football draft here in 2021. Now, before we get into this mix, just a quick reminder, our draft guide is scheduled to drop on July 1st. If you want to order one and you haven't yet, you need to get one because they're flying off the virtual shelves. Over 600 pages of all things fantasy football for only $19.99. You can find it on our website, thefantasyheadliners.com. Head over there after this video. But now let's talk about Nick Chubb and Ezekiel Elliott. Which ones should we go with here in 2021 fantasy football? All right, so this is how I think we should do this right here. And we're going to compare these guys head-to-head in a few rushing stats, receiving stats, some X factors, and really find out which one of these guys may be the safer, the better fit for us here in 2021. Now, on the first slide, we're talking rushing, and it's a 2-year average. Why did I do a 2-year average? Well, Zeke had some things going against him last year that I don't feel should totally diminish his value. I mean, Dak Prescott being hurt, that definitely, hurt Zeke. The offensive line being hurt him also. Nick Chubb, he missed a few games last year, right? Missed 4 games. And then the year prior, it's an entirely different coaching staff and a different philosophy in Cleveland. So as you can see, over the past couple years, these guys have both had something to deal with. So I really wanted to get a better picture. And Nick Chubb, being a younger guy, hasn't been in the league as long. I took, the last 2 full years to compare these guys head to head. But we'll start it off right here at the top with ADP. Now, for ADP, it's important, right? Obviously, we want to know which one of these guys we can get a little bit cheaper. However, in this case, they're both first-round picks, right? Chubb going at 1.12, last pick of the first round in a 12-team league, and then Zeke at the 1.08, a few spots ahead of Chubb. Like I said, the rounds aren't different, so it's not that big of a difference, but Chubb does have the slight value increase here, being that he's a couple spots later. Yards after contact per attempt. Now, these guys are close once again. Nick Chubb sitting at 2.85 yards after contact per attempt, where Zeke is at 2.2. Not a huge difference, right? We're talking about 0.6 yards, like 2 feet of difference. So it's not a huge difference. However, it does show me that Nick Chubb is still able to gain those extra yards, those extra feet, if you want to call it here in this case, to fight for a little bit more. I'm not going to knock Zeke too much for this one, but as of right now, Nick Chubb does edge him out slightly here as well. How about evaded tackles per game? Now, this one, it's bigger, right? We have 6.25 evaded tackles per game for Nick Chubb, where Zeke is at 4.6. This tells me the elusiveness is a little bit leaning the way of Nick Chubb. He's able to evade a tackle before he even sees that contact, right? He's making those yards every time he touches the ball. And he's getting, 2 more a game than Zeke is. I absolutely love that, and I will take that because that one evaded tackle, those 2 evaded tackles, could lead to a 50-yard rush at some point. I want that potential upside. On to yards per touch. Now, yards per touch is their total yards for the year divided by their amount of total touches they had. So the 2-year average, a slight advantage once again going the way of Nick Chubb, 5.6 yards per touch to Ezekiel Elliott's 4.7. Both respectable numbers. Neither are bad by any means, but once again, the slight edge going the way of Nick Chubb. What about breakaway runs? We're talking about runs over 15 yards, right? We want those big play possibilities. And honestly, Nick Chubb absolutely blows Ezekiel Elliott out of the water here. Nick Chubb is averaging 15.5 breakaway runs a year. That is huge. The big plays are there on a weekly basis almost for Nick Chubb. I know a lot of times last year where people were disappointed going into the second half. Maybe Chubb had, 15 carries for only 60 yards, and then all of a sudden in the fourth quarter, he'd bust off a 50-yard run, end with 120 and 2 touchdowns. I mean, you can see that a lot with Nick Chubb over the past couple years. For Zeke, he's averaging only 6.5. Now, Zeke isn't really known as a burner anyway, right? He's going to bang between the tackles. He's going to pick up the yardage. He's going to find the end zone a time or two, maybe even more so than a Nick Chubb. But the breakaway runs just aren't there, right? We're nickel and diming it down the field at this point with Ezekiel Elliott, and part of that has to do with his offensive line, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. Broken tackles are up next. Another big difference going the way of Nick Chubb, right? He averages 26.5 broken tackles a year. That just gives you those extra yards, that opportunity at extra yardage. Zeke sitting at 19.5, so not a bad number by any means, but once again, just another category that Nick Chubb is slowly pulling away. Last category then on this page, we have team rush attempts per game. Now, these numbers should be a little bit skewed, right? Kevin Stefanski just took over and changed the culture to a run-first offense in Cleveland last year. However, we're talking about 2 years ago when that wasn't the case, but when you look at the numbers, they made up for it in 2020, right? They're going to run the ball a lot in Cleveland. And once again, the Browns slightly edge out the Cowboys over the past 2 years with team rush attempts per game, with Chubb at 27.75. And honestly, that number was really dropped because last year they were over 30 per game. So that's definitely something that could tick up here in 2021. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. And this is where we start talking about some receiving and some miscellaneous categories here. We'll start with targets, receptions per game, yards per reception, have total touchdowns average per year, and fantasy points per game. So for the first one here, let's talk about targets. And honestly, this one is not even remotely close. Zeke Elliott is dominating, had 71 targets each of the last 2 years. Chubb, an average of 33.5. Sure, that number hurts a little bit because he missed 4 games last year, but that's not Chubb's game, right? Chubb's game is not to be involved in the passing game. That's kind of what Kareem Hunt is for. We know that. We have known that for years. No surprise here. Receptions per game, it's a little closer, right? 2.3 for Chubb, 3.5 for Zeke. I do see Zeke staying right around that same number, though. I mean, with Michael Gallup, Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, there's so many options in this offense. They don't really need to rely on checking the ball down to the back, out of the backfield there in Dallas very often, right? What about yards per reception? Well, all of a sudden, Chubb's a little bit more efficient, right? He may not get the amount of receptions, but when he gets it, he does a little bit more with it, right? Averaged 8.5 yards per reception, where Zeke was at 7.15. A few miscellaneous categories. What about total touchdowns? They're super close. Zeke has the slight edge with 11 touchdowns per year. Chubb's sitting at 10 per year, both in the double digits, both great numbers. Fantasy points per game. This one right here actually surprised me a little bit. I expected Chubb to take this category, but Zeke barely edged him out. 16.3 fantasy points per game to 15.7. This is a half PPR scoring over the last 2 years. So on this slide, you can tell this is where Zeke excels. This is where Zeke distances himself from Chubb in this aspect of the game. But let's move on to some of the X factors. The X factor is going to be here on the next slide. And that's where we get to talk about the offensive line, the defense that they're playing with, who's their quarterback play, the quality of it, who's the backup that they have to worry about taking some of their touches, and then the head coach. So let's start off with the offensive line. And a lot of people still want to think this is 2 or 3 years ago in Dallas where their offensive line was dominant. I don't want to take that away from Dallas because they still have a lot of the same pieces. However, it's not what it used to be, and now they're older. They're continually banged up there in Dallas. They can't seem to keep those guys healthy, and year in and year out, it's getting to be a little bit more of a headache. Where Cleveland, on the other hand, is younger and continues to prove on a yearly basis. They are arguably, in my opinion, the best offensive line in all of football as of right now, and I have to give the edge this year in 2021 to the Cleveland Browns and Nick Chubb. What about the defensive side of the football? I got to give it to Cleveland. Again, they brought in Jadeveon Clowney, a great pass rush. Their secondary is great. Look at Dallas. And maybe this is the way to look at it. It's not so much what Cleveland has, it's what Dallas doesn't. And where Dallas is going to struggle is in the secondary. And we saw it a lot last year, right? Dak was having to go out there, went before the injury, and having to throw 50 plus times a game all the way through the fourth quarter to try to play catch up the entire time. They're not one of those defensive units that's going to hold opponents to low-scoring games where they can just pound the rock in Dallas. They can do that in Cleveland, right? Now, Cleveland has a tough divisional schedule, but outside of that, they should have a lot of leads late to where they can rely on Nick Chubb running the ball in the fourth quarter, and I don't care if it's garbage points or whatever you want to call them, they're all the same in fantasy football, and I got to give the edge to the Cleveland Browns. When it comes to quarterback play, not even messing around with this one. Even though Dak is coming off a major injury, Dak Prescott is the better quarterback. Baker Mayfield is what he is, right? A lot of people want to continue to overvalue Baker Mayfield, but when you take him for what he is in Cleveland, it's more of a game manager. You know, he goes out there, he protects the football, doesn't turn it over very much, moves the ball through the air time and again, but they know they're really going to rely on the running game. Dak Prescott, the better quarterback play here, though, in Dallas. What about their backup running backs? Everybody and their mother wants to bring up Kareem Hunt on a yearly basis. Well, Nick Chubb continues to produce despite Kareem Hunt, and here is exactly the reason why. We talked about the team rush attempts a little bit earlier, right? 30 a game, we can't expect Chubb to get 30 carries every single game, right? They're going to have to use someone else, and Kareem Hunt is definitely the guy who's going to go out there and get right around 8 to 10 carries a game, and that is okay. Behind this offensive line, there's more than enough volume for both of these guys to be huge producers in fantasy football. Both could be top 12 easy. We've seen it numerous times in the past, and I won't be surprised if we see it once again here in 2021. Tony Pollard, somebody who gained a little bit of steam after 2020, right? But that really had to do with a lot of other things going on in Dallas with all of the injuries that Tony Pollard got a little bit more of a chance. A few big plays boosted the numbers a little bit. I'm not concerned about Tony Pollard taking, carries and work away from Zeke to the point where it really, really affects his value. Head coach, Kevin Stefanski. We talked about him in Cleveland. Obviously, he is a run-first, heavy run-minded scheme offense, right? I mean, they're going to run the football, and that's what worked out for them. That's what got them to the playoffs. They improved in the offseason in that area, and they're going to continue to pound the rock. We know that. Can we say the same thing for Mike McCarthy in Dallas? I really don't think we can, right? Mike McCarthy is not known for a heavy rushing offense. And then you add in the fact that they have Dak Prescott with Cooper, Gallup, and CeeDee Lamb. They're going to throw the ball a lot. Plus, we mentioned the defense. They're going to be trailing. They're going to have to throw it a lot. And that overall worries me from a coaching perspective there. All right, so now it's time to make a decision, right? We've compared these guys head-to-head in numerous categories. We've talked about some of the X factors here in 2021, and when I look at both these guys head-to-head, I don't think either is a bad option whatsoever. If it's me, if I'm on the clock, if I'm making that decision, it may not be a surprise. I'm going with Nick Chubb, and no, it's not Chubb bias. I just showed you the numbers as to why I feel that way. I mean, he's somebody who's finished inside the top 10 in both 2019 and 2020, despite having Kareem Hunt involved in that offense. It's a run-heavy offense in Cleveland. They're going to be one of the top rushing teams in all of the NFL, behind arguably the best offensive line in the NFL. And where we saw Chubb struggle with his pass-catching numbers, he makes up that difference by those potential big plays, those breakaway runs that we talked about a little bit earlier. The defense in Cleveland, way better than the one in Dallas, and it could lead to a lot more carries late in games for Nick Chubb as they're trying to run down the clock and just get that victory. Dak coming back from a major injury. I'm pulling for Dak. We are huge Dak supporters, but the fact remains, does he come back and perform at 100% after that gruesome injury? Is there a little bit of timidness, putting some weight on that ankle at time? Do we see him kind of progress a little bit slowly as the season starts? There's just a bunch of question marks there where we don't have that in Cleveland. Baker Mayfield's success isn't strictly tied to the success of Nick Chubb. It's just a different offense, right? And plus, we'll mention Mike McCarthy once again. He hasn't had a team inside the top 10 in rush attempts in the NFL in the last 20 years. So he's not somebody who's known for being heavily reliant on a running game, and we really don't expect that to change here in 2021. That's why they have all those pass catching weapons. So for me, if I'm on the clock and it's ticking down, if I'm having to choose between Nick Chubb or Ezekiel Elliott, for me, I'm going Nick Chubb here in 2021, and I'm riding the lightning here once again. But we want to stay interactive. What do you think? Who are you taking? Were any of these stats a little bit of a surprise to you? Did this change your mind at all? That's what we want to know down below in the comment section. We're going to stay as interactive as we possibly can. If you look back over past videos, we're almost trying to respond to every comment on every video, which is super tough, but we're doing the best we can. So throw those comments down below. Let us know what you think. We look forward to hearing those comments and communicating with you guys. Do me a favor. It's the off season. Hit the like button if you can. It really helps us out here on YouTube to help push some views our way when they're already a little bit lower because football is still a few months away. But we greatly appreciate that support. Hopefully you guys have a great rest of your day, a great rest of your week. We'll talk to you later.